Your soulmate just sent you a final message. Open this before time runs out. It didn't come with urgency the way movies portray last messages. There is no panic in it, no dramatic edge, just a quiet heaviness that settled into the space around you, as if something had been released rather than sent. This message didn't arrive to scare you or rush you. It arrived because a moment closed on the other side, and something needed to be acknowledged before it passed completely. There was a pause before you even realized you were holding one. A pause in your breathing, a pause in your thoughts, a pause in the constant mental noise that usually fills the gaps. That's how you know this isn't imagination. Imagined things excite the mind. Real things quiet it. This message wasn't loud because it didn't need to be convincing. It already knew where to land. At some level, your soulmate reached a point where holding everything inside stopped making sense. Not because they suddenly wanted answers, but because clarity finally formed. Clarity doesn't always lead to action right away. Sometimes it leads to release. And this message carries release more than request. What makes this final isn't that it ends the connection, but that it ends a phase of uncertainty. They didn't send this to pull you closer or push you away. They sent it because something had to be completed internally. Completion doesn't always look like goodbye. Sometimes it looks like truth finally being allowed to exist without resistance. You might notice this message doesn't feel emotional in the way you expected. There's no rush of longing, no spike of fear, no dramatic sadness. Instead, there's a grounded seriousness. The kind that makes you sit still for a moment afterward and feel the weight of what was unsaid finally being set down. That weight isn't yours to carry anymore. Your soulmate didn't arrive at this moment impulsively. It came after many quiet reflections, after nights where sleep didn't come easily, after internal conversations they never shared with anyone. This message carries all of that history without explaining it. That's why it feels dense, even though no words were spoken. There's also something important about the timing. This didn't arrive when emotions were running high. It arrived when things felt calm. Calm is when truth surfaces. Chaos hides it. They waited until their feelings were settled enough to be honest, without distortion. That's why this message feels clean instead of messy. You may sense that this message isn't asking you to respond immediately. There's no pull toward action in it. No demand, no expectation. That's intentional. This was never meant to create movement on the outside. It was meant to finish something on the inside. And now that it has, the connection can exist without tension. There's a subtle respect in this message that matters. Respect for you. Respect for what was shared. Respect for timing. They didn't want to leave things unresolved emotionally, but they also didn't want to interfere with your peace. So this message traveled quietly, trusting that you would feel it when you were ready. You might notice how your body reacted before your thoughts did. Maybe your shoulders relaxed. Maybe your chest felt lighter. Maybe your mind stopped racing for a few seconds. The body always registers emotional truth before the mind understands it. That physical shift is part of the message too. This final message isn't about regret. It's not an apology. It's not a confession. It's acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that what existed between you mattered, that it shaped them, that it changed them, and that it deserved to be honored, even if it wasn't fully lived out in the way either of you once imagined. What makes this message time-sensitive isn't urgency, it's readiness. There was a narrow window where they could release this without reopening old wounds. That window closed once the message was sent. Not because something ended, but because something stabilized. This is the last message because it did its job. You may feel a sense of calm finality after receiving it, like something that used to hover in the background of your life has gently stepped aside. That doesn't mean the connection disappears. It means it no longer needs to be processed. It can simply exist as part of your story without demanding attention. There's also freedom in this message, even if it doesn't feel obvious yet. Freedom from replaying moments. Freedom from wondering what they felt. Freedom from carrying emotional questions that never had clear answers. This message answers them without words. Your soulmate didn't send this because they gave up. They sent it because they grew. Growth sometimes means holding on differently. It means knowing when to stop pulling and start trusting. This message reflects that maturity. You might notice that after this, signs from the universe feel softer, less urgent, less repetitive. Angel numbers may still appear, but they feel like reassurance rather than instruction. That's because the lesson associated with this connection has integrated. You don't need reminders anymore. There's also a quiet dignity in how this message arrived. No spectacle, no announcement, just truth, delivered gently. That's how you know it wasn't about control. It was about closure of a cycle, not closure of a bond. If you're wondering whether this message means something will happen next, understand this clearly. It doesn't promise movement, and it doesn't block it either. It simply clears the emotional air. From here, anything that happens will come from alignment, not unresolved tension. This message also isn't asking you to hold on to hope or let go of it. It's asking you to stand where you are without leaning forward or backward. Presence is the only response it requires, and presence is something you already have. You may realize that this final message feels strangely comforting, even if it carries weight. Comfort comes when something true settles into place. The nervous system relaxes when it no longer has to anticipate unfinished emotional business. Your soulmate trusted that you would understand this message without needing explanation. That trust is part of the connection itself. They knew you would feel the shift, not analyze it. After this moment, you may notice how your thoughts about them feel different. Less charged, more neutral, more grounded. That's not emotional distance. That's emotional resolution. Resolution doesn't erase meaning, it stabilizes it. This message didn't close a door. It closed a loop. Loops keep energy cycling. Closure allows energy to rest, and rested energy doesn't disappear. It integrates. You didn't miss this message. You received it exactly when you were meant to. Timing like this doesn't rush or delay. It arrives when both sides are ready to let something be complete without forcing the next chapter. Whatever comes next in your life will come without this unresolved weight attached. That's the gift inside this message. Not loss, not ending, but clarity. This is why it feels final. Not because nothing remains, but because nothing is unfinished anymore. The feeling didn't arrive as a message this time. It arrived as an absence. The kind you only notice when something that used to press against your awareness is suddenly gone. You weren't thinking about them, you weren't replaying anything. Yet there was a strange calm that felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. Not empty, not sad, just still. That stillness is important, because it only shows up after something has been fully delivered. As the hours passed, you may have noticed how your thoughts moved differently. They didn't circle the same emotional landmarks anymore. There was no pull back into old moments, no urge to decode silence, no internal debate about what something meant. The mind doesn't stop questioning unless the heart has already understood. That's what happened here. Understanding arrived first, quietly, and the mind followed. What changed wasn't the memory of the connection, it was how much space it occupied inside you. Before, it sat close to the you surface, easily triggered by small things. Now it feels deeper, steadier, like something placed carefully where it won't tip over. That's not forgetting, that's integration. When something integrates, it stops interrupting your daily life. You might have felt this shift physically before you recognized it emotionally. A deeper breath, a relaxed jaw, a sense that your body wasn't bracing anymore. The body doesn't lie about emotional resolution. When something finishes its work internally, the nervous system stops preparing for impact. It rests. There's also a subtle change in how time feels after this kind of message. Moments don't feel rushed or heavy. They feel neutral. That neutrality isn't boredom, it's balance. Balance shows up when you're no longer pulled forward by hope or backward by regret. You're simply here. As the day unfolded, you may have realized you weren't waiting for anything to happen next. No expectation of a follow-up. No anticipation of contact. That lack of expectation isn't resignation. It's acceptance. Acceptance doesn't close doors. It removes pressure from them. What was sent wasn't meant to start a conversation. It was meant to end an internal loop. Loops keep energy moving in circles. Endings allow energy to settle. Once energy settles, it doesn't disappear. It becomes available for something new without dragging the past along with it. You may notice that when thoughts of that person come now, they don't come with urgency. They don't demand attention. They pass through gently, like a memory that no longer needs to be examined. That's how you know something completed its cycle. Emotional cycles don't end loudly. They end quietly. There's also a sense of respect embedded in what you felt. Respect for timing. Respect for boundaries. Respect for the fact that not everything meaningful needs to be acted on immediately. That respect wasn't imposed on you. It was offered. And you felt it. This second phase after the message is often misunderstood. People think clarity should feel dramatic. They expect tears or relief or sudden decisions. But real clarity feels uneventful. It feels like standing on stable ground and realizing you're not going to fall. You might find yourself more present in ordinary moments now, listening more fully, responding instead of reacting. That's not because something new entered your life, but because something old stopped demanding your attention. When emotional noise quiets down, life feels sharper. There's also an honesty that surfaces here. An honesty about what mattered, what didn't, and what was never meant to be forced. That honesty doesn't judge the past. It contextualizes it. It places it where it belongs instead of letting it float unfinished. You may realize that you don't feel the need to explain this experience to anyone. Not because it's secretive, but because it's complete. Incomplete things demand explanation. Complete things don't. They just exist. What's important to understand is that this wasn't about someone choosing to disappear or stay. It was about choosing to stop carrying unspoken weight. Carrying weight distorts connection. Releasing it clarifies it. That's what you felt. As more time passes, you might notice your emotional reactions feel cleaner, less layered, less complicated. That's because there's one less unresolved thread pulling at you. Emotional simplicity doesn't mean shallow feeling. It means clear feeling. There's also a sense of trust that grows here. Trust in yourself. Trust that you didn't miss something. Trust that what needed to reach you did. That trust replaces the old habit of second-guessing. When trust settles in, doubt loses its grip. You may find that signs or synchronicities feel different now, too. Not louder, quieter, less repetitive. They don't push, they reassure. That's because the lesson connected to this phase has already landed. You don't need reminders when you're aligned. This part of the process isn't about moving on or holding on. It's about standing still without discomfort. Standing still emotionally is something most people struggle with. You're not struggling with it now, and that's growth. You might even feel a subtle gratitude arise, not directed at anyone in particular, but at the clarity itself. Gratitude for not having to wonder anymore. Gratitude for peace that doesn't require explanation. There's also a maturity in how this settled. No drama, no demands, no unfinished business. Just acknowledgement and release. That maturity didn't happen by accident. It came from both sides reaching a point where honesty mattered more than outcome. If you're wondering whether this means something is over forever or about to begin, understand this clearly. This moment wasn't about future prediction. It was about present alignment. Futures build more cleanly when the present isn't cluttered with unresolved emotion. After this, you may notice you're less reactive to reminders, songs, places, random thoughts. They don't pull you into a spiral. They pass through. That's not detachment. That's resolution. Resolution doesn't erase meaning. It preserves it without pain. It allows memory without charge. That's a gift, even if it doesn't feel dramatic enough to name. You didn't need to rush to open this message because it wasn't hiding. It was waiting for the right internal moment to land. And it landed when you were stable enough to receive it without it disrupting your peace. Now, whatever comes next in your life won't be built on unanswered questions from this connection. It will be built on clarity. Clarity doesn't guarantee ease, but it guarantees honesty. This is the difference between something ending and something completing. Endings can feel abrupt. Completion feels natural. What you experienced was completion. And from this place, you don't need to look back or ahead. You can stand where you are, fully present, without anything pulling you in either direction. That's how you know the message did exactly what it was meant to do. The shift announced itself in the smallest possible way, through a sense of emotional quiet that didn't ask to be examined, only noticed. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't sadness. It was the feeling of no longer being pulled toward a question that once lived rent-free in your mind. You didn't wake up thinking about answers. You woke up aware that something had finally stopped circling. That kind of awareness doesn't come from distraction. It comes from completion. Later, as the day moved forward, you may have caught yourself responding to life a little differently. Not dramatically, not consciously, but gently. Situations that once stirred emotional curiosity felt neutral. Thoughts that used to linger pass through without staying. That's when it becomes clear something has changed at a structural level. When emotions no longer hook into old patterns, it means the pattern itself has dissolved. At some point, you may have noticed that memory feels different now. Not erased, not dulled, just calmer. Like a photograph that no longer carries the sound or movement of the moment it captured. Memory without emotional charge is one of the clearest signs that something has settled properly. You can remember without reliving. That's not loss. That's emotional health. There's also a noticeable shift in how your inner dialogue sounds. Before, there may have been an undercurrent of what if running quietly in the background. Now, that voice has gone silent. Not replaced, not argued with, just gone. When a question leaves without being answered, it means the question was no longer necessary. Understanding arrived without language. You might feel this most clearly in moments of stillness, standing in line, sitting alone, pausing between tasks. The stillness doesn't feel heavy anymore. It feels neutral, even supportive. Stillness only feels uncomfortable when something inside you is unfinished. Comfort with stillness means nothing is asking for resolution. As more time passes, your emotional reactions may feel cleaner, less layered. You're not responding to the present plus the past at the same time anymore. You're responding only to what's actually happening. That's a major shift. When the past stops speaking over the present, your nervous system relaxes. Life feels simpler, not because it is simpler, but because you are clearer. There's a quiet confidence that often appears at this stage, and it doesn't look like confidence the way it's usually described. It's not assertive or expressive. It's the confidence of not needing to chase meaning, of trusting that what needed to be felt has already been felt. This kind of confidence doesn't announce itself. It stabilizes you from the inside. You may also notice that your relationship with time feels different. Waiting doesn't feel tense. Moving forward doesn't feel rushed. Time feels like something you're inside of, not something working against you. That's what happens when urgency dissolves. Urgency only exists when something feels unresolved. There's an emotional honesty that surfaces now too. An honesty that doesn't demand action or explanation. You can acknowledge what mattered without needing to prove it mattered. You can accept what was real without needing it to continue. This kind of honesty doesn't close your heart. It protects it. You might find yourself less interested in replaying the story altogether. Not because it lacked significance, but because its significance has already been absorbed. Stories only repeat when their lesson hasn't landed yet. Once the lesson integrates, the story rests. At some point, you may notice how your body feels more at ease in subtle ways. Breathing deeper, less tension in the jaw or shoulders, a softer posture. The body is often the last place resolution shows up, but when it does, it's unmistakable. The body stops preparing for emotional impact that never comes. There's also a sense of emotional independence that grows here, but not the isolating kind. It's the independence of knowing you don't need anyone else to validate what you experienced. What you felt was real because you felt it. That certainty doesn't depend on confirmation. It depends on self-trust. You may realize you're no longer looking for signs to explain this connection. Not because signs stopped appearing, but because you stopped needing them. Signs exist to guide awareness. Once awareness is established, signs become reassurance rather than instruction. That's a natural progression, not a loss of magic. Another subtle change shows up in how you imagine the future. There's less emotional projection, fewer imagined conversations, less mental rehearsal. The future feels open, but not demanding. You're no longer leaning into it or away from it. You're standing upright in the present, and that posture changes everything. You may even notice compassion toward the situation instead of longing or confusion. Compassion for yourself. Compassion for the other person. Compassion doesn't try to fix or resolve. It understands. And understanding doesn't need to take sides. There's a maturity in how this phase feels that can be surprising. No dramatic ending, no emotional crescendo. Just a clean sense of that has finished doing what it needed to do. Mature endings don't collapse. They settle. You don't feel compelled to talk about this with others. And that's not because it's hidden, it's because it's complete. Completed experiences don't seek witnesses. They become part of who you are quietly. As the days continue, this sense of internal alignment stays with you. Not loud, not intense, just present. It influences how you choose, how you rest, how you engage with life. It's not something you think about, it's something you live from. There's also freedom here, though it may not feel dramatic. Freedom from emotional anticipation. Freedom from internal bargaining. Freedom from wondering whether something was left unsaid. What was meant to arrive has arrived. What was meant to leave has left. This stage doesn't come with instructions. It doesn't ask you to move on or hold on. It asks you to stay where you are, without tension. Staying without tension is one of the hardest things to learn emotionally, and you're doing it naturally now. You may notice that when thoughts drift back, they don't pull you under. They float by. That's not avoidance. That's resolution. Resolution doesn't erase thought. It removes charge. Nothing about this feels rushed or delayed. It feels timed. Timed in the way things feel when they happen after readiness instead of before it. Readiness changes how things land. This landed cleanly. You didn't miss anything. You didn't misunderstand anything. You didn't arrive late. This stage came exactly when it needed to. Because you were finally steady, enough to receive it without it disrupting your balance. From here, whatever unfolds next in your life won't be shaped by unfinished emotional business from this chapter. It will be shaped by clarity. Clarity doesn't guarantee certainty, but it guarantees honesty. And honesty, once integrated, becomes a foundation rather than a question. That's what this phase is. Not an ending that hurts, not a beginning that rushes, but a completion that allows you to stand fully present without anything pulling you backward or forward. That's how you know this message has finished speaking. It began as a quiet recalibration rather than a realization. Like the inner volume of your life was adjusted without you touching the dial. Nothing announced itself. Nothing demanded your attention. Yet you could feel that the emotional atmosphere inside you had changed. Not lighter, not heavier, just clearer. Clarity has a texture to it. It feels clean. It feels honest. And most of all, it feels final in a way that doesn't hurt. As the day unfolded, you moved through ordinary moments with an unfamiliar steadiness. There is no undercurrent of anticipation, no background tension waiting for something else to happen. Tasks felt complete in themselves. Conversations didn't linger in your mind afterward. You weren't replaying words or reading between lines. When the mind stops searching for subtext, it means it trusts what it already knows. At some point, you realized your emotional energy wasn't split anymore. Before, part of you lived in the present while another part stayed, tethered to an unresolved space. Now, everything felt gathered in one place. This kind of wholeness doesn't come from answers. It comes from acceptance. Acceptance isn't giving up. It's recognizing that nothing else is required for peace to exist. There was a subtle but important shift in how you related to memory. Memories didn't disappear, but they stopped pulling you backward. They existed without gravity. You could think about what happened without feeling like you were stepping back into it. That's a sign the emotional imprint has softened. When an experience no longer demands to be relived, it has finished teaching you what it came to teach. Your inner dialogue changed too, though quietly. There was no longer a narrative trying to explain or justify what you felt. The mind didn't feel the need to label the experience as good or bad, meaningful or wasted. It simply acknowledged that it happened, that it mattered, and that it was complete. That level of neutrality is not indifference. It's resolution. You may have noticed that your body responded before your thoughts did. A deeper breath without effort. A relaxed posture. Less tension held in places you didn't realize were tight. The body is always the last to let go, and when it does, it's because it trusts that there's nothing left to protect against. As more time passed, there was a noticeable change in how you related to uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer felt like a problem to solve. It felt like space. Space where life could unfold without being forced into shape. That's a powerful transition. When uncertainty stops feeling threatening, it means your sense of safety has moved inward. You weren't waiting for confirmation anymore. Not from signs, not from messages, not from coincidences. The habit of checking, noticing, interpreting had softened. This didn't mean you stopped believing in meaning. It meant meaning had already settled. When meaning integrates, it no longer needs to announce itself. There was also a new honesty in how you looked at the situation. Not romanticized, not minimized, just seen for what it was. You could acknowledge both the depth and the limitation without feeling conflicted. That balanced view only comes after emotional maturity sets in. It's the ability to hold two truths without forcing one to cancel the other. At some point during the day, you realized how little emotional residue was left. No lingering heaviness, no sharp edges, no unresolved ache. That doesn't mean the experience lacked importance. It means it reached its natural conclusion. Natural conclusions don't slam doors. They close them gently. Your reactions to everyday triggers felt different too. Things that once reminded you of the past didn't carry the same charge. They registered, then passed. When triggers stop triggering, it's because the emotional loop they fed has closed. Closed loops don't reopen without invitation. You might have noticed an increased sense of self-trust emerging. Trust in your perception. Trust in your emotional timing. Trust that you didn't misread what you felt. That trust replaced the old habit of self-doubt. Doubt thrives when something feels unfinished. Completion leaves no room for it. There was also a quiet respect that surfaced, not just toward the other person, but toward yourself. Respect for how you handled the process, for how you stayed present, for how you didn't force clarity before you were ready to receive it. That respect feels grounding. It restores dignity to the experience. Instead of wondering what this means for the future, you found yourself more focused on how grounded you felt now. The future didn't feel urgent. It felt open. Openness without urgency is a sign that you're no longer trying to escape the present or rush beyond it. You didn't feel compelled to share this shift with anyone, not because it was secretive, but because it was settled. Settled things don't need commentary. They become part of you quietly, influencing how you move rather than what you say. There was also a noticeable decrease in emotional noise. Fewer mental tangents, less internal storytelling. When the mind stops narrating an experience, it's because the story has ended. What remains is understanding, and understanding doesn't need repetition. You may have found yourself more emotionally available for your own life, more present in conversations, more attentive to small moments. That's not coincidence. Emotional energy that was once tied up in unresolved space is now free to flow back into the present. There's a kind of peace that emerges here that doesn't feel like happiness or sadness. It feels like alignment. Alignment doesn't sparkle. It stabilizes. It allows you to exist without emotional friction. You might have noticed that patience comes more naturally now. Waiting doesn't feel heavy. Moving forward doesn't feel rushed. Time feels cooperative rather than adversarial. That shift alone can change how life unfolds. There's also compassion here. But it's not dramatic. Compassion that understands without needing to fix. Compassion that doesn't assign blame. Compassion that simply recognizes growth on both sides. That kind of compassion doesn't reopen wounds. It closes them. You may realize you're no longer framing this experience as something that happened to you, but something that moved through you. That reframing is powerful. It turns experience into wisdom instead of weight. As the days continue, this sense of completion doesn't fade. It doesn't need to be maintained. It holds on its own. That's how you know it's real. Anything that requires constant effort to sustain isn't integrated yet. There's a grounded confidence that comes with this stage, but it's not performative. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in how calmly you respond to life, in how you don't rush explanations, in how you allow things to be what they are. You're not waiting for another message, not because you wouldn't recognize it, but because nothing inside you needs it. Needing and wanting are different. Need dissolves when something completes. Want can exist without urgency. This phase doesn't feel like moving on. It feels like moving forward without dragging something behind you. That distinction matters. Moving on implies loss. Moving forward implies integration. Nothing about this experience feels wasted. Even without continuation, it feels purposeful. Purpose doesn't always come from outcome. Sometimes it comes from clarity gained. You didn't miss your chance. You didn't misunderstand the moment. You didn't fail to act in time. The timing of this completion aligns with who you are now, not who you were before. From here, whatever enters your life will meet you on steadier ground. Not ground shaped by longing or confusion, but ground shaped by understanding. This isn't an ending that echoes. It's an ending that settles. And when something settles this deeply, it doesn't ask for attention anymore. It becomes part of the foundation you stand on. It surfaced as a quiet sense of emotional readiness. Not the kind that pushes you forward, but the kind that lets you stand still without discomfort. You weren't bracing for anything anymore. You weren't waiting for clarity to arrive. You simply noticed that your inner world felt prepared, like a room that had been cleaned without you watching it happen. Nothing was missing. Nothing needed rearranging. As the day moved along, you may have noticed how naturally your attention stayed with what was in front of you. There was no background pull toward unfinished thoughts, no mental drifting back into old moments. Presence didn't feel forced. It felt available. When presence becomes available like this, it's because something inside you has stopped asking for resolution. There was a subtle change in how you related to emotion itself. Feelings still came and went, but they didn't linger unnecessarily. They didn't stack on top of each other. Each one had its own space to exist and then pass. That emotional flow is a sign of integration. When something unresolved lives inside you, emotions get congested. When it resolves, they move freely. You may have realized that you weren't monitoring your reactions anymore, not checking whether you felt too much or too little, not questioning whether your responses were appropriate. You trusted them. Trusting your own emotional responses is something that only happens after clarity settles. Before that, emotions feel suspicious. Now, they feel reliable. At some point, you might have noticed a gentle confidence emerging, not the confident kind that speaks loudly, but the kind that allows silence. Silence in conversations. Silence in decision-making. Silence in moments where you once felt the urge to fill space. That silence wasn't awkward. It felt intentional, like you didn't need to prove anything anymore. There was also a noticeable shift in how you remembered the past, not revisiting it, not reframing it, just acknowledging it without reaction. Memory had lost its emotional teeth. You could look at it without flinching. That's one of the clearest signs something has fully settled. When the past no longer asks for a response, it has completed its role. You might have found yourself more attuned to your own needs now. Rest felt necessary instead of optional. Boundaries felt natural instead of forced. Saying no didn't come with guilt. Saying yes didn't come with obligation. When emotional noise quiets, self-awareness sharpens. There was a moment when you realized you weren't afraid of what might happen next. That realization may have surprised you. Fear often hides under anticipation. Now, anticipation felt neutral. You weren't leaning into the future or pulling away from it. You were allowing it to approach at its own pace. Your body likely reflected this before your thoughts did. A softer posture, a slower breath, a sense of physical ease that wasn't tied to relaxation, techniques, or distraction. The body responds quickly when it no longer needs to stay alert. Emotional completion tells the body it's safe to rest. You may have noticed how little you needed to talk about this experience. Not because it was insignificant, but because it was complete. Incomplete experiences demand expression. Complete ones settle quietly. They don't seek validation. They become part of your internal landscape. There was also a new patience present, but it didn't feel like waiting. It felt like trust. Trust that things don't need to be pushed to arrive. Trust that when something belongs, it moves toward you without force. This patience didn't slow you down. It steadied you. You might have realized that the urge to interpret signs or search for meaning had softened. Not because meaning disappeared, but because it had already been absorbed. Signs serve awareness. Once awareness is present, signs become background reassurance rather than guidance. There's an emotional maturity that settles in at this stage that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't felt it. It's the ability to hold complexity without confusion, to acknowledge significance without clinging, to respect what was without demanding it continue. You may have noticed that you're more emotionally available for your present life now, listening better, engaging more fully, enjoying small moments without distraction. Emotional energy that was once tied up in unresolved space has returned to you. That return can feel subtle, but it changes everything. There was also a quiet compassion that grew, not just outward, but inward. Compassion for how you handled the process, for moments where you didn't have clarity yet, for the time it took. That compassion wasn't indulgent. It was grounding. It restored trust in your own timing. You might have felt a sense of dignity return to the experience. Dignity comes when something ends cleanly, without chaos or regret. When you can look at it and say, that mattered, and it doesn't need to hurt anymore. That dignity changes how you carry yourself. Instead of wondering what the experience meant, you began noticing how it changed you, changed how you pause, changed how you choose, changed how you let things unfold. Meaning reveals itself through impact, not explanation. There's also a steadiness here that doesn't fluctuate with mood. Good days don't feel inflated. Difficult days don't feel overwhelming. Emotional range still exists, but it's contained within a stable center. That center is something you built without trying. You may have realized you're no longer emotionally rehearsing conversations that may never happen. The mind stops rehearsing when it no longer anticipates unfinished business. That mental quiet frees up a surprising amount of energy. You might also notice that when thoughts drift back, they don't hook into you. They pass through like weather, not ignored, just not absorbed. That's the difference between suppression and resolution. Suppression resists. Resolution allows and releases. There's a subtle freedom in this stage that doesn't feel dramatic enough to name. Freedom from wondering. Freedom from internal negotiation. Freedom from carrying emotional weight that no longer belongs to you. You're not holding on, and you're not letting go. You're standing in the middle without tension. That middle space is where balance lives. Balance doesn't rush you into the next chapter. It prepares you for it quietly. You may find that your intuition feels clearer now, not louder, but more precise. When emotional noise fades, intuition doesn't have to compete for attention. It becomes easier to hear without strain. There's also an increased respect for your own boundaries. Not rigid boundaries, but natural ones. You know when to engage. You know when to rest. You know when something aligns and when it doesn't. That knowing isn't anxious. It's calm. You might have noticed that the need for certainty has diminished. Not because certainty isn't valuable, but because you trust yourself to handle uncertainty without losing stability. That trust is one of the most powerful outcomes of emotional completion. This stage doesn't come with instructions. It doesn't tell you what to do next. It doesn't promise anything. It simply leaves you grounded enough to choose without fear. You didn't miss anything. You didn't arrive too late. You didn't fail to act. Everything unfolded in the order required for you to receive it without being destabilized. What remains now isn't longing or regret. It's understanding. Understanding doesn't shout. It settles. From this place, whatever enters your life will meet you on stable ground. Not ground shaped by unfinished emotion, but ground shaped by clarity and self-trust. This isn't the kind of ending that echoes loudly. It's the kind that becomes part of your foundation. And foundations don't ask to be noticed. They simply hold you steady as you move forward. It arrived as a quiet sense of emotional stability you didn't have to work for, like realizing you're standing on solid ground after walking for a long time without noticing the terrain. There was no emotional announcement, no internal dialogue explaining it. You just felt steady. And steadiness, when it arrives naturally, is one of the clearest signs that something is truly settled. As the day moved forward, you might have noticed how little resistance there was inside you. No inner pushback against reality. No subtle frustration about how things turned out. Acceptance didn't feel forced or rehearsed. It felt earned. Earned through patience, reflection, and the slow process of letting something complete itself instead of trying to control how it ended. Your thoughts behave differently now. They didn't rush ahead looking for conclusions. They didn't drift backward searching for meaning. They stayed where you were. That presence wasn't effortful. It was available. When the mind stops time traveling emotionally, it's because it no longer needs to escape or revisit anything. There was also a noticeable shift in how you experienced emotional triggers. Things that once stirred curiosity, longing, or tension barely registered. Not because you were numb, but because the emotional charge had dissolved. Triggers only exist when something unresolved is still active. Once resolution happens, the same stimulus loses its power. You may have felt this most clearly in moments of quiet. Sitting alone, walking without distraction, pausing between tasks. Silence no longer felt like something you had to endure. It felt neutral, even supportive. Silence becomes comfortable when nothing inside you is asking to be answered. There was a subtle confidence growing underneath everything, but it didn't look like confidence the way people usually describe it. It didn't make you more expressive or assertive. It made you more grounded. Grounded people don't need to convince themselves or anyone else of what they know. They simply live from it. At some point, you may have realized how little you were thinking about outcomes, not hoping for a specific result, not bracing for disappointment. The future didn't feel like a threat or a promise. It felt open. Openness without anxiety is a sign of trust, not in circumstances, but in yourself. Your relationship with memory continued to evolve too. Memories surfaced occasionally, but without emotional pull. You could observe them without being drawn in. That ability doesn't come from detachment. It comes from integration. Integrated experiences don't disappear. They settle. There is also a change in how you spoke to yourself internally. Less explanation, less justification, less mental commentary. The inner voice became simpler, more direct. When something completes emotionally, the mind no longer needs to narrate it. Silence replaces storytelling. You might have noticed a return of emotional energy you didn't realize had been tied up. More focus, more presence, more capacity to engage with what's in front of you. Emotional energy isn't created or destroyed. It's released when it's no longer trapped in unresolved loops. There was an honesty in how you looked at the experience now. You could acknowledge what it was without exaggerating it or diminishing it. No need to protect it. No need to defend it. Balanced perspective is a sign of maturity, not indifference. You may have felt more aligned with your own boundaries, knowing when to engage, knowing when to step back, knowing when something felt right or off without overthinking it. Boundaries felt natural instead of strategic. Natural boundaries come from self-trust. There was also a sense of dignity that settled into you. Dignity doesn't come from being right or validated. It comes from handling something meaningful without losing yourself in it. You didn't abandon your values. You didn't force outcomes. You allowed things to unfold honestly. You might have realized that the urge to seek confirmation had faded. Not because confirmation wouldn't feel nice, but because it wasn't necessary. When you trust your own perception, you don't outsource certainty anymore. That trust becomes a quiet anchor. Time began to feel cooperative again, not something you were racing against or waiting on. Moments felt complete as they were. Completion in the present reduces pressure on the future. Pressure only exists when you feel behind or ahead of yourself. There was a subtle compassion that developed too, not dramatic or emotional, but steady. Compassion for yourself. Compassion for the situation. Compassion without judgment. Compassion doesn't reopen stories. It closes them gently. You might have noticed you were less interested in analyzing what happened. Analysis fades when understanding arrives. Understanding doesn't need repetition. It rests. That rest shows up as mental clarity rather than emotional intensity. Your body continued reflecting this internal shift. Deeper breaths, more relaxed posture, less tension carried unconsciously. The body releases only when it feels safe. Emotional safety had returned. You may have found that you were more emotionally available for your life now. Conversations felt richer, experiences felt sharper. That's not because life changed. It's because your attention returned to the present. There was also a newfound patience, but it didn't feel like waiting. It felt like readiness. Readiness without urgency. Urgency disappears when you trust timing. Trusting timing doesn't mean doing nothing. It means not forcing. You might have realized that you no longer frame this experience as something unfinished. It had a beginning, a middle, and a natural close. Natural closes don't leave residue. They leave understanding. There was also clarity about what you're no longer willing to tolerate emotionally, not from bitterness, but from awareness. Awareness sharpens standards without hardening the heart. You may have noticed your intuition felt clearer now. Not louder, not dramatic. Clear. Intuition thrives in quiet environments. Emotional noise used to drown it out. That noise is gone. There's a freedom in this stage that doesn't feel exciting enough to announce. Freedom from internal negotiation. Freedom from emotional rehearsal. Freedom from wondering if you missed something. You're not leaning backward or forward emotionally. You're centered. Centered people don't chase closure. Closure meets them. This phase doesn't come with instructions or timelines. It doesn't push you toward the next chapter. It prepares you for it quietly. You didn't need to hurry through this. You didn't need to linger either. Everything unfolded at the pace required for you to remain stable through it. What remains now isn't emptiness. It's space. Space isn't absence. It's potential without pressure. From this place, whatever enters your life will meet you as you are now. Grounded, clear, and emotionally available without being exposed. This isn't an ending that demands attention. It's an ending that gives you your footing back, And when you stand on solid ground, you don't need to look down to check. You simply walk forward. You might have noticed that your emotional responses felt cleaner now. Not muted, not suppressed, just clear. Feelings came and went without sticking. Nothing lingered longer than it needed to. Emotional flow like this only happens when there's no unresolved weight distorting it. This is what emotional health actually feels like, not constant happiness, but balanced movement. There was a quiet dignity in how this ending settled. No bitterness, no regret, no sense of being unfinished. You could acknowledge what mattered without needing it to continue. That ability doesn't come from detachment. It comes from maturity. Mature endings don't demand attention. They earn peace. You may have realized that your body felt different too. Less tension you didn't know you were carrying. Breathing that felt deeper without effort. A posture that felt more natural. The body releases last, and when it does, it's because it trusts that there's nothing left to protect against.
As time passed, you likely noticed that your focus returned to your own life fully, not as escape, but as a natural recentering. Conversations felt some present, moment felt more vivid, emotional energy that was once tired elsewhere and had returned to be quietly. There was also a sense of self-trust that felt stronger than before. Trust in your emotional timing, trust in your perception, trust that you didn't understand what you experienced. That trust replaced the old habit of second guessing. When trust settled in, doubt no longer has a role to play in your daily life. You didn't feel the need to talk about this ending, not because it was insignificant, but because it was complete. Incomplete things seek witness. Complete things become part of who you are without announcement. You may have noticed that even when thought drifted back briefly, they didn't pull you into emotion. They passed through like weather, they're not avoidance. That's resolution. Resolution doesn't erase memory, it removes charge. There was also compassion here, but it wasn't loud. Compassion that understood the timing, compassion that didn't assign blame, compassion that allowed growth on both sides without opening wound. This kind of compassion doesn't exhaust you, it steadies you. The feature didn't feel urgent or intimidating. It felt open. Open without pressure, you weren't leaning away from it. You were standing in the present without tension. The middle ground is where balance lives. You might have noticed that your intuition felt clear now, not louder, not dramatic, just accurate. When emotional noise quiet, intuition doesn't have to fight for attentions. It becomes easier to trust without explanation. There was also a renewed respect for your own boundaries, not rigid boundaries, but natural ones. You knew what you were available for and what you were not. The knowing didn't come from fear, it came from clarity. This ending didn't ask you to move on or hold on. It didn't give instructions. It simply left you grounded enough to choose freely, without emotional pressure influencing your decisions. You didn't miss anything. You didn't arrive too late. You didn't fall to act. Everything unfolded in the order required for you to remain whole through it. Timing like This doesn't rush, it waits until stability is possible. Foundations don't demand attention, they hold you steady. And now that you are standing on solid ground again, you do not need to look back to understand what happened. You don't need to look ahead to feel secure. You can simply move forward, present, grounded, and clear, knowing that what needed to complete the complete, and what comes next will arrive without the weight of the past attached to it. That's how you know this ending was real. Not because it's hurt, but because it's settled now. I hope you enjoy this video. If you enjoy, like this video, comment on this video and subscribe to my channel.